Mike. Thanks to everybody for attending today. This should be a great session. So I'd like to introduce Steve Rainville. As Mike said, he is the president and CEO of Cyber Defense Corporation. Steve has over 20 years of experience in information technology, 15 of which are specifically in IT security services. Steve brings extensive experience in cybersecurity services, including security operations center planning and optimization, security information and event management solutions and deployments, and security and analytics for Canadian and global enterprises. Over the years, he has guided and led multiple client projects with the objective of building their security operations center, identifying security gaps, and creating security roadmaps to improve their compliance with corporate and legal requirements. So with that, I would like you to welcome Steve Rainville and take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks everyone for joining today. So you should be seeing the screen, my deck here. Please, as you do have questions or any comments during this, feel free to use the chat as was mentioned, or we can do this live verbally at the end. We'll try to keep this interesting and at a certain pace so we can have some time for a conversation and dig deeper into some of the aspects here. Really, this is an overview, right? How do we create a cybersecurity culture? How do we improve? And giving you ideas and inspiration on the questions and the concerns and the risks that everyone should be concerned about, but trying to keep this at a strategic level. So, different areas we're going to talk about today, key areas of cyber risk and some statistics, some of the questions. And when I'm saying top questions, it sounds a little bit like a something to interest you from a social media perspective, top 10 questions to ask, but really, how do we start that conversation and how do we sometimes go over difficult topics? And then really cyber culture, right? Secure culture in the organization. How do we get buy-in from the whole organization? So cyber risks, different types of cyber risk, deliberate destruction of information. And I'm going to give some examples of the different types of risks. So deliberate ransomware, which is the hot topic of the day, of the month, of the year. Ransomware keeps increasing, and it's very intentional, right? Criminals targeting companies that are vulnerable and figuring out how can we profit from this. But also another example of deliberate destruction, disgruntled employee decides to, obviously with some level of access, decides to destroy information or disable systems in order to cause some harm. Deliberate breach of security. Again, ransomware falls into this category because nowadays ransomware is not just about encrypting information and holding it for ransom. It's also about stealing sensitive, confidential, private information to have that extra leverage over the organization, the victim, into paying the ransom, right? It's not enough to just say, well, I've encrypted your information, pay up, or else. It's, well, I can now also divulge sensitive or confidential information and add that extra push. Obviously, employees with privileged access can be part of this type of risk. If you think about, one of the largest ones from Canada, at least, the Desjardins breach, where someone with privileged access was just so tempted to say, well, let me monetize and figure out a way to use the information that I have access to. To a certain extent, you can also think about insider information, insider trading. Essentially, it's also breach of security. Someone has access to the information, is misusing that data. And then there's this huge bucket of risk that goes with operational risk. And largely or quickly categorize it as poor management. I'm not just talking about upper management or executives. It can be poor management at the people that are executing and the rigor at which they need to, consistency at which they need to perform the work. So if we think about this, some aspects of or recurring themes that come up in the news, cloud-based access systems, you've moved some of your infrastructure to the cloud. It has to save a lot of information. You're using artificial intelligence or machine learning. You have terabytes and terabytes of data that has to be stored somewhere. And if you're using Amazon, well, you may be using what they call S3 storage buckets. And this is really simply it's what they use or what they name for storing information. However, it happens frequently, unfortunately, where system administrators will misconfigure the storage and the access to the data, and it may not be encrypted, and the network access may not be done properly. But this is one type of poor management or poor operational practices. And then we have another example with unpatched or forgotten systems, or what in IT we like to call legacy systems, right? Colonial Pipeline, they were hit with ransomware, as some of you may recall, and it was through a remote access system that people no longer even remembered that was still online. It was, again, what they were calling legacy. And so my quick comment on that one is, if there is a habit to change, there should be no such thing as a legacy system. If your infrastructure, if your information systems are up and running, connected to a network, they are production systems. The only way they become legacy, it's once they're in the recycle bin. So every system that is live, that is being used, or even that is just connected and live as an archival system, is still a vector or can be used in attacks, can be used for a data breach. So have to think and shift that thinking there. And so let's get into some of the statistics. We're talking about attacks and why do people perform these? And again, the theme with ransomware is the most prevalent, but it's all about the money. There's financial gain to perform these cybersecurity attacks. And this is from the Verizon report that they produce every year. And the 2020 version of this, well, financial motivation, I believe, was at 80%. And so it's just increasing. And so that 10, 13% was spread out with espionage and disgruntled employees and things of that nature. But really now that everyone has discovered we can profit from cyber attacks, let's go for that, right? So that's really the main motivation. How is this affecting, though? Focusing on ransomware, what we've also discovered, because these type of attacks have been going on for quite some time now, is that unfortunately, organizations that do pay the ransom because they feel they have no other choice, or the operational impact of the attack is so great that they do need to think about, well, let's pay the ransom, let's get back online. If you think about Colonial, that's what they did. The $5 million was probably less than the cost to them in a few days, right? So $5 million was just made sense to them. Let's pay, let's get back online. However, if we were to with these statistics, they have now an 80% chance of someone trying to attack them again. And transpose this into the physical world. If you have theft at your home and someone steals the jewelry and your large screen TV and other things of value, they know that you're going to replace them, and you're going to have something new that has the same or greater value than what you had before. So it might be tempting for those same criminals to come back in a few months and steal you again. So this is really where this statistic is coming from, is if you were vulnerable once and you didn't really find out, or you didn't improve your overall operational activities, you're very likely to be a victim again. And then for small and medium-sized businesses to be impacted, and this Statistics Canada, and just over 1 in 5 businesses in Canada has been a victim or impacted by a cyber incident. Obviously, not all ransomware, but 1 in 5 now. That's a lot of organizations to be impacted, and this is why you'll often hear people in cybersecurity mention, well, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And these numbers, statistics like to say that people change them depending on their objective and how they want to motivate people. You will see many vendors that will say that, actually the number of organizations impacted is much higher than this and whatnot. I just wanted to have somewhat of a neutral source from Statistics Canada of what was declared. So the number is probably higher because not everyone has to admit that they were a victim, but this is definitely something that's concerning. And the trend just keeps rising. And so on that note, I would ask, we have just a quick poll I'd like to understand a little bit of the makeup of this group. And thanks again for joining. And so I see the poll. Great. So between 51 and 100, a little bit more with over 500, a little more than 50%, and SMBs as well. Okay. So about 67% would be considered an SMB. All right. Thank you. And so I want to talk about, questions and what should we be concerned about, some of the conversations and things we need to ask, and how do we build metrics, and how do we get to better understanding and better results. And so some of the questions I've heard and some of the answers I've unfortunately provided over the years with these questions might go something like this, and these might be familiar to yourselves, right? So how much are we spending on cybersecurity, right? And depending on your market, everyone wants to compare. Oh, we're spending 2%, we're spending 3%. We're in retail, the average is 2%. We're fine. We're doing the same thing as everyone else, right? And can we optimize? Well, if you're in cyber, you never want to say, oh, we can't reduce the cost. We can't. And so typical answer, well, if you're willing to accept risk, but we don't really, as cyber professionals, sometimes we don't always communicate very well. What is that risk? What is the cost of reducing the cybersecurity budget? How does this impact by changing the budget? And today, well, are we protected by ransomware? Loaded question. Most people in cyber, especially internally, will say, "Oh, really, it depends," right? And so, based on these questions, it's really, how do they help and improve the environment, or how do they help you from a business perspective, either as an executive or as a board member, as a director? How does this help you understand what's going on? And so the amount of spend, or the percentage of the budget spent on cybersecurity, should be something very specific to your organization. Have you historically lagged behind in digital transformation? And now with COVID and with the pandemic, you've been investing heavily in digital transformation, in supporting work from home, whatnot. It would make sense that cybersecurity needs to follow along with that. If you have projects that are collecting huge amounts of information because now you want to use machine learning and artificial intelligence, and you want to collect all of this, you may now be impacted by new regulations. You're going international. You need to think about GDPR. You're doing more transactions. What's happening with PCI? Or if you're dealing with defense and you have compliance requirements like CMMC, to ramp up and to get to and meet those objectives and protect the information that you're using and protect the business from a brand and risk, you may need to invest more. And that also goes with the fact that probably everyone today here likes to say, and when we talk about our own businesses, well, we're not, yes, we're part of this vertical, but we're different. We want to distinguish ourselves. And today, IT, information systems, everything that's digital is one of those ways that we are being different. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to say, well, the market in our vertical is spending X% either on security or even on IT, and that's where we need to be. What are your business objectives, and how is information technology and cybersecurity supporting you in that area? So I think that's more relevant, is to figure out, are we doing the right things to manage our risk? And there's a cost associated with that, and just go with that instead of just benchmarking a little bit blindly with the rest of a vertical. And when we're saying protecting against ransomware, well, protecting against it, if we're saying 100%, no one should say yes. There's no silver bullet. We can't guarantee that we're going to stop every attack. Can we ensure that we are minimizing the potential impact if there's an attack that's attempted and started? Will we detect it quickly? Will we be able to respond swiftly? And worst case, are we able to recover? So if it is completely missed and you are the victim of an attack, is your sole recourse to pay the ransom and hope you get back to business? Or, can you recover? Can you use your cyber insurance to really say, okay, we're going to take those funds from our cyber insurance, which is operational risk. I need to get my operations back up and running. I need to pay for consultants and experts to do, yes, a forensic investigation, but also to enable my disaster recovery plan. That's where I need to be. And so, we need to think about what are the factors of success for our cybersecurity program. And so, obviously, all about the structure and the reporting structure. And it's not just the nice hierarchy and saying who reports to who and where are the dotted lines. But for me, the reporting structure is actually, what do we report on? What do we communicate within the structure? And going top down and bottom up, what are we reporting back? And everyone has to be on the same page. But how do you do that? That's where the cybersecurity, the framework, comes into play. Whether you're using NIST, using ISO 27000 or CMMC, whatever the framework is, at least it gives a common and standard way of describing what security controls are, how you're going to evaluate your risks, and then communicate that throughout the organization. And then, people, process, technology. The technology, definitely not, a silver bullet. The technology is also, as I was mentioning before this meeting started, cybersecurity exists because there's the technology, right? It's really that very specialized activity of ensuring that we're protecting the information, the processes, and with critical infrastructure, the people that are dependent on this technology. So then it's all about the people. How do we get them on board? How do we train them to understand what their role is within cybersecurity, within their business function? How do they make sure that they are minimizing risk, or at least it's under control, it's managing that risk? And a lot of times that's through processes, right? What processes can we put in place, or how can we improve the existing processes to identify if there are risks or an anomaly, something happening within the organization? And for example, here, what I'd quickly say is that processes can be really a benefit with regards to phishing. And we know there's a lot of things happening around that, and business fraud and whatnot. But if we have good controls around the human processes and how everyone interacts with email and online requests, that's another way we can reduce that risk. When I was talking about the technology, so even for ourselves, for CYDEF, we're part of endpoint detection and response. So it's the third block in this top row here. There's no lack of technology. But what you'll see here also is that there is no silver bullet. There is no one size fits all. And the technology here oftentimes is very, very specific for a certain benefit and a certain function, and to address a certain types of risk. And so it's often a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, we're going to the cloud, we're going to need these 6 additional vendors or technologies or whatnot. We absolutely need these. Well, have we evaluated also what's the value of what we're putting in the cloud? How are we going to use that? And what's already available from the different vendors? And so, but it's so easy to say, let me just buy something else and add it to my toolkit. The risk, I would say here, and this goes with the IT operational risk, it's all about buying a tool is only buying a tool. You still need the people trained on the technology, on this tool, to not only use it, but maintain it, update it, and the rigorous processes that will support those activities. So every incremental addition of technology or resources, whatnot, digital resources, will have an incremental cost on those processes and the people required. There's no magic there, and that has to be understood. Where we say, oh, we can just increase our footprint, there's a cost. And so what I believe could be some better questions, right, is starting to ask, well, we're doing this new project. And again, we're moving to the cloud. We're transitioning and revamping our customer relationship management solution. We're moving our ERP to the cloud. What's the risk? And the worst case, there's a data breach. What's the risk there? And then maybe this can also make you realize, well, I may have those risks as well while I'm still using my legacy system right now internally within my data center, within company walls, right? And figuring out, where do we go from here? And is this acceptable? What do we need to do to ramp up? Another factor, and this really applies also to, I guess, the top group here, when we have a portfolio, when we have many projects on the go, and you have your PMO or whatnot, is to start asking those questions of how many of our projects, and as maturity increases, is how many of my critical projects or projects involving critical assets, how many of those were completed without the involvement of the cybersecurity team? How many did we do those? Because this means that cybersecurity is going to be bolted on after the fact. It might mean that the team will come back with an assessment and saying, there's unacceptable risks on these projects. Here's what we need to do. But then obviously, no budget, lack of time, et cetera, et cetera. So there are potential problems or issues that can come from these. So tracking this information as a metric also can help improve over time. And for ransomware, going back to my earlier comment, right? Can we restore? Going also on the really with the attitude, there's no silver bullet. No one is perfect. Solutions fail. So if they do fail, how do we recover? Have we ever tested this? How long will this take? And this is where businesses and certain organizations like Colonial, I mentioned earlier, have taken that decision. Well, I should pay, because if I pay now, I'm probably online in 2 days instead of 3 weeks or 2 months, right? It all depends on the complexity and how much was affected by the cybersecurity, by the attack. Here, how much of the budget is actually spent on prevention, detection, response, and recovery? Prevention, obviously, self-explanatory. I don't want it to happen. What can I put in place? How do I put those walls? How do I do cybersecurity awareness training? Everything that can just minimize it from the get-go, from day one. Detecting it, how do I find out there's an anomaly or something going wrong? Responding to it for the response piece, and then the recovery. Worst case, what happens? But this also is not just about the big ransomware attack. It's, for example, a lot of times we work with customers and we're monitoring the laptops, the servers, and whatnot, and we see anomalies. Well, if we do see the first stages of a ransomware attack, for example, what we will tell our customers is that the fastest way to recover the one or two assets that were affected by the beginning of the attack is to reinitialize, to format those devices. So take them offline, give new devices to your employees, and then the others just recycle them, right? Just revamp and reinitialize the whole thing. Is your organization, is IT ready to do that? Do they have a mechanism to get that done efficiently? And how do you deliver new servers or laptops? Or it seems very operational, but it's part of those day-to-day activities that we need to maintain and control. And then thinking about the future, right? What are the emerging threats? And when we think about those emerging threats, are there any areas where our capabilities are starting to lag? So when we think about either threats that your CIO, your CISO is monitoring and looking, there are these new risks, right? Today, if we think about the with the advent of AI and new video technologies, you've probably seen so many videos now with the face of Tom Cruise all over the internet, right? And Tom Cruise is now doing all kinds of things, and it's not him. They're taking his face and redoing something else. I've seen an article yesterday, which I should have kept for this, but where someone used a CEO's voice to call into the company and perform fraud, right? So these are new types of risks that are coming to the organization. How are you prepared to respond to these and prevent them, detect them, respond, and how would you recover, right? So asking those questions, and this again can inform, do you need to do budgetary adjustments? And so getting to the culture and how do we get more people involved and increasing trust? Well, trust, if we look at it from a cybersecurity perspective, has historically looked like this: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So for those that have done their CISSP or those type of certifications, the CIA triad, right? How do I ensure trust in my information systems? I need to ensure confidentiality of the information. I need to ensure the integrity of that information and of those systems, right? That there's no tampering, and the availability, right? My information is only useful if people can get access to it, and only the right people can get access, et cetera, et cetera. That's how I know I can trust my environment. But the other aspect of this, and this is really about the IT systems and the data and whatnot, but the other part is the people and the process we build to work with these digital assets. And so we need to build trust between leaders. You need to build trust at the executive level, and you need to build trust with the board. And one of the challenges here is that at the executive level, we have teams with various backgrounds. And so the common shared information or experiences is not necessarily that great. So we need to ask some of the questions that I was talking about, but also to think about, these aspects here. And so I've taken this from the Harvard Business Review, and I was searching for trust and how do you build trust with leaders and whatnot. And so I found this report really interesting. You can get it from their store. It's an 11-page document, and Francis Frey and Ann Morris created this document and this piece of work through their collaboration at Uber. And how do I get trust back in Uber when I have issues with the CEO and whatnot? And so I wanted to use that lens to see how can we improve trust and how can we work better between, because I've seen so often there's, information technology or the CIO and CISO, and then there's the rest of the business, right? How do we get that to be a more cohesive team and functioning better? Again, how do we increase trust? And so authenticity is my take, and really this is my view on what both women have proposed and documented. So do we feel that you're hiding something, right? And are you transparent? Are you a person, whether on either side, right, is CIO, CISO, or any other C-suite, any other executive, and can go down obviously to the rest of the team in the organization. But can we be transparent? Can we be authentic about what we know and what we don't know? And oftentimes we say that, from a technology perspective, we own that, we are in control. But what happens? How well do we understand the business? Do we really understand the objectives and the business risks? And how are we translating that on the IT side? And it goes the other way as well, right? Is today, how many people understand ransomware and the motivations and how the attacks work? Or do we understand the emerging threats or the threats that are really relevant to your business? Right. So there needs to be that sharing of information to get that common understanding. And then empathy is really where, from a cybersecurity perspective, why should people care? And oftentimes, and this is almost a daily topic of, why do we care? And so many SMBs are, I'd say, in a blissful state of ignorance to say, well, I don't need to be worried. I'm an SMB. No one wants to, why would someone attack me? Why would someone try to encrypt my information or ask for a ransom? I'm not interesting. Well, it's just because you're connected to the internet. You're available. And if you've taken the time to build your systems to run a business, you believe that business to be successful, so you're worth something. That's really the basic principle that they're going with. But we need to find it. What's the motivation? What's in it for you, right? Why would you care about cybersecurity? And just talking about regulations and rules and whatnot is not the best way to get people on board. And so we need to make it as transparent. And one of the analogies I like to use for this is cars and how they were built initially and how they're built today, right? Cars weren't safe when they started off. And as they evolved, obviously there was regulations and whatnot to tell car manufacturers they must be safe. And it got to the point, maybe 15 years ago, where you'd see a lot of ads where cars would say 5-star crash rating, very, very safe, and this and that. And people would talk about all of the safety features that you would have in a car. If you look today, how many people, and if you're shopping for one, how much time do you actually spend on thinking about the security and the protection a car offers you? It's all built in. It's just there. You don't think about the airbags. You don't think about the seatbelt and maybe the braking now that even tries to protect for pedestrians and other people around you. It's just part of the package, right? Security and safety in a car is just built in and is so ingrained. And that's where we need to be from a technology perspective. And so when we get to one of the real examples is, passwords, and it's a recurring topic that comes over time, is figuring out, well, you need to put in strong passwords. What does strong passwords mean? Well, it's a complex password. It's this, it's that. Well, and remember, don't write it down. Use this, do that. Why are we making it so complicated for everyone? So as organizations that need to say, we need to manage this change for our business, for everyone, all of our staff, let's talk to the CIO, to the CISO, to the teams that are expert. How do we make this as easy as possible? Does that require investment? Yes. Does that require some changes and some management around that? Of course. But in the end, it will make it easier for everyone. It will reduce the risk. And if it's easier to comply, and it also makes everyone faster and more effective. So we need to think about the longer term benefits of some of these changes that we need to do. So it's not just the incidental, let's make the passwords stronger, it's going to reduce the risk, move on. It's going to create angst, and people try to they want everything to be easy, and they're going to bypass. So we need to think about better ways. And so my last piece where I want to dig in is into the logic, right? And so part of our conversations is, how do we improve everyone's understanding about cyber risk, and what do we do about it? So going back to the first risks that I had mentioned here is on the session, deliberate destruction of information, right? And those two examples, what type of metrics could we do? I'm taking the example here for ransomware. Well, and these aren't obviously, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's just to give you an idea of where things can go. How many of the staff, what's the percentage, were trained in cybersecurity and successfully completed it? And how many incidents has the cybersecurity team identified that were caused by phishing links? And how many incidents did they have to respond to? And how many of our assets, what's the percentage, are covered by endpoint monitoring? So we can detect if and when they click on something they're not supposed to, we can respond quicker. We can respond faster. So the recovery isn't about half of our business environment or the whole business got attacked and the attack was successful. It was limited to that person's device clicking on a link and they were affected, right? So it's all of those. How do we measure our progress? Another one for deliberate breach of security. Well, if we're thinking about, in this case, in privileged access, well, how many systems do we have? What's the percentage where we've encrypted the information? We've encrypted the data. If we want to make sure that people can't access it and it's limited to those that have their, according to the roles, how can they access the data if it's encrypted? Well, they've been authorized. So one good way to protect the information, obviously. The other one, segregation of duties. If we want to minimize the number of people that can access sensitive information, we need to think about segregation of duties. And just reporting on those can elicit actions. And at least conversations saying, is this a risk we're willing to accept? And especially when we're in SMB and we have a limited amount of people, you will see that overlap. But at least you have an understanding, because also it's a point of you can trust your employees that they're not going to be disgruntled employees. They're not going to try and sabotage the company. But from an IT perspective, if you have few people that have a lot of access into your systems, it also means that you may need to do additional levels of protection around those user accounts. Because if I'm alone within my company, I'm the system administrator and I'm basically God in everything, then my account is very, very valuable to someone to compromise, because then they get the keys to the kingdom. Operational risk, right? And what can we think about this? Some additional statistics here or metrics that we can build. How many systems have up-to-date patches? And again, this should be linked with our asset management. And is our asset management up to date? Do we have 100% coverage? Do we know about all of our assets? Systems using multi-factor authentication. I had just mentioned about the passwords. Multi-factor authentication is one of those ways where we can reduce the risk around passwords. And how many devices do we have that have local encrypted storage? So if you lose a laptop, if it's stolen, if it's compromised, if someone else tries to connect to that device, can they access the information that's found on it? And you can answer those questions and see how much of a risk this represents and what can you do to improve it. And so part of this as well is to, especially for IT and cybersecurity experts, to think about this, that it's not because the number is bad that we need to be shy and not want to present them, because you can only get better if you're willing to talk about where the issues are and why are these things there. And obviously, if as part of the conversations before the metrics were created is everything's fine, nothing to see here, everything's under control, and then we obviously show metrics that aren't all green, that might be a problem. But it goes back to my earlier part of authenticity and how do we get things better. So, cybersecurity sometimes can feel a little bit like this. We're trying to spin those plates, not let any one of them fall. But the reality at the same time is, as the business grows, right, we need to think about, and if I can do this, some type of analogy here, the plates, if we compare them to the business needs, well, then I need additional poles or sticks that could represent cybersecurity controls, new controls that we need to implement to support those business needs. So as things increase, obviously it's not necessarily a one-to-one relationship, but you get the gist of it. In cybersecurity, it's all about, we don't want the plates to break. We're supporting the business. We need to keep this going, right? Well, how could we cheat? Well, let's glue the plates to the poles. Let's build that strong relationship and the plates won't fall. The poles can bend, right? Cybersecurity controls can adapt, you can use context, and they might wave around, but they just won't fall and the plates won't fall. So just trying to put that image in your mind. And then we keep adding controls. So it also goes to the fact that as we're adding all of these, we need people, we need the processes to make sure that everything stays in balance and we can't drop anything. We have to keep everything and all of it going. Because otherwise you are going to break plates. And so where I wanted to go with this is, and maybe someone can put some comments in the chat if they like the analogy, but if you look at the plate with the pole, kind of looks like a nail. But with nails, we can build great things, right? And rivets and nuts and bolts, right? You can take pieces of wood, of metal, of plastic, and you can build things just like we're taking. And these are the parts that assemble and help the business grow. How do you put an addition on your house? Well, you're going to need some type of fastener. You're going to need locks and all kinds of things to make things safe. And so the walls don't fall apart. That's where cybersecurity is, right? It needs to be an intricate part of the business. So hopefully we're right on time and you've appreciated this. Looking forward, I'm going to open up the chat here. So see where, and it's been very quiet. So hopefully it's after lunch and I haven't put all of you to sleep. But I wanted to quickly mention before we start any Q&A here is around the an offer that we have for you as a member of CGIC. We do offer a managed service for endpoint detection and response. So when I was talking about the protect, detect, respond, and recover, well, we help with the detect and respond on endpoints. So your laptop, your desktop, your servers, and to figure out, and we do the monitoring. So it's a turnkey service to help you identify if there are any anomalies on your systems and quickly respond to them. And, so we can keep your business safe. You get 30 days to try the solution, deploy to as many devices as you want. And, if you sign up by this date, you can get an additional 3 months of free service using the permissional code that we have here. Thanks, Sydney, and looking forward to more conversations. So how about we go with, are there any questions? Simply go to CYDEF.ca. There's a big yellow button for the free trial. Enter the code there, and our team will be in touch with you quickly to get this started.
So thanks very much, Steve. I do have some questions that have come through. So maybe okay. I'll just give those to you verbally. So the first one was, even though our company has a full cybersecurity suite and the monitoring and some of the good things you've talked about, one of our primary concerns is the security of our directors. Statistics have told us that you're 12 times more likely, a director is 12 times more likely to be the major target of a cybersecurity breach or an attempt to get at data, because there's information that is sent from the company to the directors who may not have the same level of protection that the company has. So what are your comments on that situation?
Great question. And it's something I believe probably most boards overlook. Unless they're more mature and they think about the risks to the information that they're sharing. So it's because we trust the directors, right? And no one typically internally at the business will blink twice at, oh, let me send the next board meeting documentation and package to a Gmail account and worry about that. So yes, there's risk with the information leaking. I would say for everyone is consider that, especially for your board members that use free services such as Google. Google does have a policy to index, the files and the contents and whatnot. So anything confidential should not be sent to a Gmail account. You can use online portals and things like that to ensure authentication, and who's connected and who has accessed the information. But then you also need to do some level of cybersecurity awareness training to your directors about and probably data classification. In telling them, you may know this by now, but this is confidential, highly sensitive information. We need you to ensure that your device that you're using to access this information is encrypted. You have a strong password. You have this, and if that's not the case, let us know so we can help you and figure out that part. And sometimes it might be encouraging them with, well, just read the information, the documentation through the online portal. Do not save it on your computer, right? Or use some other mechanism to figure that out. So hopefully that answers that part of the question, but it's really to go into that, and we could almost have a full session on talking about that type of risk. I'm seeing another one here from Sylvester. How can a small business access affordable cybersecurity? I'd say the way there is really to understand, do a quick assessment, and that could be, we could have an hour conversation with what's your current situation, and really figure out what field are you in. Are you doing research and development? Are you in manufacturing? Are you in retail? Obviously, your risks are going to depend on the type of business you're in and the type of assets that you have in the size of the company. But really, then to keep things affordable, it's to understand also what's the risk, right? And to give you an example, we have some customers that, well, most of our customers are SMBs. Some of them are larger in, over 1,000 employees. But one ransomware attack that we prevented for an SMB, we had a discussion with them of, what could be the cost, and it was over $100,000 for that single ransomware attack, and that wasn't counting whatever the ransom would actually be. But just recovering for a company with 30 staff to reinitialize their whole systems, hope to restore the data, was over $100,000. So then when we say, well, what's affordable? Well, if I'm paying $1,000 a month, or whatever is that amount for your security program, is that worth protecting you against a threat or a risk of $100,000 or $500,000? That's where we need to get to what's affordable.
So thanks for that, Steve. To follow up on Sylvester's comment, what about the implementation or the creation of cyber insurance, and how would that form part of this initiative to as your overall cybersecurity plan? Right.
So cyber insurance is something that I believe all organizations should look into, because it's operational risk. In the end, that's what the product is to help you with your operational risk with regards to information systems, to information technology. So it's all about, well, if I'm no longer operational, I have insurance that can help me recover, right? And so I've had discussions in the past, and I've had a session with an insurance expert, and for them, the policies, and yes, you'll have to go through hoops and consider this just like it's the business version of life insurance. And okay, well, yes, you can get insured, but do you have certain criteria? And now, unfortunately, as ransomware attacks mostly are increasing in frequency, well, those criteria are going up. And because right now it's the comparison I'd almost do again to life insurance is they're discovering most organizations are just like heavy smokers, right? And so the chances of having a health issue is very high. Our cybersecurity hygiene isn't necessarily very good, so criteria is going up, and so are the premiums. Nonetheless, you get the insurance, you can use that insurance to recover, but you also know then that you're on that treadmill that you need to improve, because let's say you have to use your cyber insurance. Well, the next time around or after the incident, your insurer is going to come back and say, well, you've gone through this. We've seen the response. We've seen everything that's happened. Well, and what we're seeing is that many times they will say you need to put a cybersecurity incident response plan in place. You need to put that in. You need to find a firm of experts to be able to respond to an incident. You need to find those partners. You must do cybersecurity awareness training. So again, the protect, detect, respond, and recover, they will want you to put those in place. And so depending on where you're at in your maturity, you need to look into those.
Okay, and we have one other question I think we have time for. How often should a company require periodic external assessments, testing, and reporting on cybersecurity matters?
Okay. It's also, I don't want to say it depends. So for anything that is, let's say it's your informational website, there's no transactions, there's no money being transferred. It's not a site that is connected to other of your systems. It's just hosting for information. That might be something that you can get away with no testing, right? Or just very basic assessments of. If you are a service provider with technology, such as ourselves, right? We do testing multiple times a year because it's our brand reputation at risk. If we, and we're not the size of Microsoft and we don't have millions of customers to be able to say we can take a hit like Microsoft does or has in the past, or, SolarWinds, and say we'd still be in business. So I think it goes with the risk, and it also goes with the amount of changes that your IT environment goes through. So that's where I would put it. And then as your cybersecurity program matures, it's really about how good you get at doing changes, at performing changes, as implementing your technology systems rigorously and securely, right? So if I can move to the cloud, if I manage my changes, or if I do everything internally, and again, going back to the analogy to cars, right? Not dinging any mechanics, but the mechanics at your corner garage that do your oil change aren't the same mechanics that do that for the Formula One, and can strip apart an engine and build it back in a few hours, and are ready to compete in a race. But the thing is, it doesn't mean that those people at the corner garage can't get better and faster and more precise at what they're doing to make sure that there's never going to be a leak and that they can identify any problems, right? So that's really where you want your whole team to become, is better at things. And then you can reduce that frequency of testing because you have a high degree of confidence through your metrics and your reporting and everything else that things are under control. So I'd say the testing, you test as frequently as you mean and as you can enable yourself, based on the risk represented by the system and maybe how little visibility you might have in that system, and you're worried, right? So it's really about managing that risk. You're building a brand new system. You've never used that technology. It's the first time you're going to the cloud. You're in Google's cloud or Amazon or Microsoft. And, this is really dependent on customer data and whatnot. I would test it, even if you've used experts and whatnot, just make sure that it's all good, and then see how well they rated, and should you revisit that redo that exercise more frequently. I know this video will also be, it's recorded, it's going to be presented and whatnot. So if it's made available on the different platforms where they may, ask those questions, reach out to me, steve@cydef.ca, pretty easy, and ask the questions. I'd be very happy to continue this conversation, and maybe on a different topic, or even have just an open session and have a conversation around this, because to your point, there's so much to talk about and sometimes so little time, but it's also I love hearing from business executives and people that have different backgrounds to what's the concern, what don't we know, and because even for myself, I don't know what are all those right questions and the best things to ask and how do we improve, right? So getting those different perspectives is really interesting to me, and to exchange. So love the opportunity.